If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
So last night we watched the documentary, aka Roe, about Norma McCorvey, and I just want to jump into this discussion with why are we even saying anything about this? Why are we watching the documentary? Why are we paying attention? Yep. And I think that a lot of pro-life people are expressing the sentiment, why do we care what she actually believed in her heart? What Jane Roe, of Roe v. Wade, why does what she thought about abortion influence our pro-life beliefs? And right. I think that you're right. It is logically bad to say we should base our beliefs and what about abortion is true based on what she says or thinks.
Right.
That's fair. But what we need to understand is that this is a huge story. Pro-life people might not realize how much this is going to influence our social momentum and political momentum right now when it comes to abortion. The everyday person who flips on their TV and sees this documentary on, we're seeing all of these articles coming out in Rolling Stone and LA Times. You need to realize, as a pro-life advocate, this story, whether we want it to be or not, is significantly larger than even something like the Unplanned movie that came out.
Right.
Because the Unplanned movie was a huge thing for the pro-life movement. It was in some mainstream theaters, right? Everyone was talking about it. And it certainly feels that way when you're a pro-life advocate. But does the everyday person know about the movie Unplanned? Maybe, maybe not. This is all over mainstream media. And I think that pro-choice people, especially those that aren't really involved in anything to do with abortion, are going to be watching this. And they're going to be influenced by it in a heavy way. I mean, Josh, you and I both agree on that. You're
going to hear about this. We exist to help you have good conversations with pro-choice people. And I hate it, but this is going to come up sometimes. And we want to help you not just talk well about it. That was something that we did in a Facebook post a couple of days ago where we kind of wrote out, here's a couple of different kinds of things that you could say, not having even seen the documentary yet. And this morning, what we want to do as quickly as we can is try to do another part of our mission, which is to help you to think well about it. And there are a lot of things that both pro-life and pro-choice people are saying about this documentary. And I think some of those arguments being made some are better than others. And we just kind of want to say, here's our take. Watching it live, thinking really, really carefully about it, having research. I've read about every article there is on this from both the pro-life side. I've been all over Live Action News and LifeSite News. There's a lot of articles there. I've also read articles from pro-choice people and reviews and tweets and things, and we've kind of connected a lot of dots to come up with what is our most plausible explanation. And we just kind of want to help you to do that, help you to how should we process a documentary like this? So that's what we're going to be doing today. And I want to say, I went into this with a bias. And my bias was I wanted to see that this was yet another super deceptively edited documentary that we can just kind of shrug off. A few years ago, I did this video series analyzing a different pro-choice documentary called Reversing Roe. And I did it because it was so deceptively edited. And as a video editor, I can kind of see those tricks. And I wanted to expose those tricks as well as talk about the pro-choice arguments. And so I went into this thinking this might be a very similar thing. Maybe Josh is going to do an AKA Jane Roe exposing, documentary, because if the more legitimate that this documentary is, the more of a PR hit the pro-life movement takes.
And I think the pro-life movement is not taking a hit because Roe used to be pro-choice and then was pro-life, and actually she's pro-choice the whole time, and that's what's rocking about it. There are two really big takeaways from this documentary for the everyday person. The first is, did the pro-life movement manipulate Norma McCorvey? Did they use her as a PR piece? And, everything that they accused the pro-choice movement of doing. Was that something that was happening? And so if that's true, the pro-life movement has some corrupt major players. And I think that really hurts our credibility and our character of the pro-life movement and of the people that were close to her. And so that's really important. That's why we care what she's saying and why we need to watch this. And the second thing I took away from it, like as a young pro-lifer and as someone who really is aware of what the pro-life movement is like now and was in 1980, I think everyday people are not going to get the impression that anything's changed or anything's different.
Right.
And so the pro-life movement that is portrayed in this film, I don't think it's like necessarily deceptive because it's showing her life, and a lot of like her major life moments are in the 70s and in the 80s and the 90s. And so they're showing that pro-life movement, not so much representative of what is the pro-life movement in 2020. And I can tell you that as pro-life advocates, if you're discussing this documentary, you need to help your friends understand that point because it's incredibly important. And some of the people that they have speaking on there, I mean, the one pro-lifer that they have on there is not really representing the pro-life movement in a like thorough, holistic way. He's really talking about his angle of the pro-life movement and his activism that happened in the 90s. And it's just very, very different than a lot of the big players. And, you know, we've become a lot more woman focused. Our apologetics is so much better. You know, some of the things we say and do are just drastically different. And I think for the better, because we learn with time, we learn from mistakes. And there's a lot of great precedent that's been set for us. Like we're standing on the shoulders of some giants that devoted their life to this work. And so it's not to discredit it. It's just to say, you need to help them understand how you are as a pro-lifer and how it might be different from what they're seeing with some of the stuff like clinic bombings that are horrible that are being portrayed in this documentary.
Right.
We don't believe in any abortion-related violence. And I think that's incredibly important to talk about.
Yeah, like a pro-choice person watching this documentary is not getting a fair picture of what the modern pro-life movement looks like, or even what it usually looks like when pro-life people are outside of abortion clinics. Like, I think what Flip Benham does is more of an outlier, and now more people are doing a lot friendlier looking sidewalk counseling that doesn't look as, you know, for lack of a better word, like scary or weird as what Flip Benham is doing. I'm sorry. Like, I appreciate, you know, anyone who's passionate, about abortion and trying to fight abortion. But like, that's just not what most people are doing outside of abortion clinics. I'm not saying it never happens. I'm just saying you're not getting a picture of what the pro-life movement looks like, where we've got 2,000 pregnancy resource centers that offer free help to women all the time, and a lot of other angles of the pro-life movement that are just not related to protests. So while I went into the documentary hoping to see a super deceptively edited one, even just for the sake of my friends, I know people who were really close to Norma McCorvey, and like for their sake, that's kind of the bias that I went into it. And unfortunately, by the end of it, I came away feeling like the documentary is biased, but I don't think it was very deceptively edited. And it makes me really sad. And I'll explain later, like a few of the reasons why I don't think it was, I'll explain like the parts that were biased, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I think one of the things that we got to talk about is, like, Rachel and I have been reading all the tweets and all the different things that pro-life and pro-choice people are saying. And there's some patterns, and there's some kind of common questions and arguments that are coming up that I think would be good for us to just talk about a little bit. And one of those questions is from a lot of pro-life people saying, like, is it possible to believe anything in a documentary that was produced by biased pro-choice people? Live Action News ran, I think, a pretty impressive piece where they really dug into like the IMDb on like all the producers, and yeah, pretty much all the producers have been involved in pro-choice projects before. And so there's kind of I think a lot of people are being very quick to just dismiss the entire thing. We don't even need to watch it kind of thing because it was made by pro-choice people. So who cares what they would say? And I want to say the documentaries can be deceptively edited. Again, I've seen it. I've watched the Reversing Roe series. And it would be nice to be able to see the full unedited tapes of Norma on camera. In fact, pro-life leaders have even published an open letter asking for them. I don't think it's going to happen. And frankly, I don't know what they would show. Maybe they would show that they cherry-picked the things that Norma said, or it's possible that she might have been pretty consistent on those days. I don't know what those tapes would prove, but I do think that it's possible to gain truth, to learn things from a biased documentary. Like in the, you know, for the sake of open-mindedness and avoiding confirmation bias, I think it's important for us to pay attention to what the other side is saying and do our best to learn what we can. Most documentaries have at least some bias. I think it's almost impossible to make a truly unbiased documentary. I don't think I could. And so we should totally keep that in mind, and we should watch with a critical eye. But some tweets that I've seen from pro-life people, however, I think go a major step further, implying that there is no need to pay any attention to a documentary that's made by biased people. But if that's true, then that cuts both ways. Then that means that pro-choice people should not watch documentaries that pro-life people make about Gosnell, about Abby Johnson. They shouldn't watch movies like Unplanned. And we would want them to, because we think there are really important true things in those. And so I think we need to be careful to make this kind of overly broad. Well, if pro-choice people made it and they're biased, then I don't have to pay any attention to it. So I'll just kind of say just a couple of quick things before we jump into, you know, we're going to talk about what we think is the most plausible take on what to think about Norma McCorvey, as well as some of the alternative explanations. We're going to kind of talk about all those. But just real quick, as a video editor, and I was paying so much attention, like I was trying not to blink while watching this thing, because I'm looking for all these little editing things, like J-cuts, where you can like have someone talking, and then on top of the video, you put in some B-roll. And then it sounds like the audio is all one thing, but that's a point where you can make a cut and take something from another place and put it, like, I know these tricks. And I'm telling you, they didn't use those tricks. Yeah. Like the worst, like not worst, but like the worst sounding things that Norma McCorvey says for the pro-life movement, like I think the documentarians were intentional about not cutting. Yeah. Like they were long cuts. I was listening. There's no like audio things. Like I think we're hearing what Norma was saying. I do think that there is some bias, and some of the worst things was kind of like point, like the three most important things I noticed as a video editor watching this. There was a lot of emphasis on anti-abortion violence, and that is not a good look for the pro-life movement, because pro-choice people just kind of lump all pro-lifers with anti-abortion extremists who did things like that. I have to say, though, the fact that Norma McCorvey's door was shot with buckshot is a legitimate thing to include. Yeah. And like I just think that's defensible. That's an important part of her story. Again, the most controversial quotes from her quote-unquote deathbed confession, I don't think those were deceptively edited at all. I wish they were. I don't think they were. And this is also important for pro-lifers to understand, because another thing I've been seeing is people saying she was just having a bad day. She was having a bad day on that day. She said some things she didn't really mean, and then, you know, later she apologized to her pro-life friends or whatever. Well, the problem is, unfortunately, if you pay attention, she says pro-choice things, like about thinking that at least some abortions should be legal, on multiple different days in multiple different locations. It wasn't just one bad day. It was like, you would have to say it's like every single time they were around her, she was having a bad day, because she says pro-choice things in that little restaurant. She says pro-choice things in her little apartment. Like there's different places. And I think it was more than just one bad day.
And I think that it would be absolutely fair to say, we don't know what else she said in those interviews. Yep. And unless we get all the footage, we won't know if she said this pro-choice thing followed by those people killing babies. We need to overturn Roe. We don't know what she said because it's edited. But is it deceptively edited, as in trying to put words in her mouth and trying to spin the sentiments that are pro-choice sentiments and try to make it look like she was saying something she didn't believe in? I don't think so. My honest appraisal of that. And we're going to get into what we think is the most plausible explanation, given all of the evidence, given like what the people who knew her really well said and what she said in the documentary and what she said publicly different times. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but I think it's important to just say, like, we were looking for that. And I genuinely think that it was like a fair representation of what was coming out of her mouth
at that time,
as far as
in
editing
her life
goes. Yes, at that time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's talk about like some of the motivations that people might have for speaking different ways or saying different things publicly, because there's been a lot of talk about like the financial part of it. Was she paid to do this documentary? Was she paid to speak pro-life things? You know, like all of that. And then I think the other motivation that's also plausible, we're going to get to, which is the relational side, the emotional wanting to be loved and admired and accepted. And I think that both motivations are plausible explanations for why someone would say what they say. So are we ready to kind of dig into that?
Yeah.
Or did you have any more editing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can jump into that.
Yeah. So was she in it for the money? I think that's a really big question, and something that a lot of the news articles I'm reading are focused on.
It's like every headline is she was paid to be pro-life, basically. That's their explanation.
And the number that is being thrown out a lot is like $500,000. Well, if they had $500,000, you know, and I had people texting me, pro-life people text me, is there really that much money in the movement? Like, where's this money coming from? And was she really like paid like $500,000 to like keep quiet, like all this stuff? So I think it's important to kind of get into the details here.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think it's true to say, just because you're getting paid to say something publicly does not mean what you're saying is insincere or that you don't believe what you're saying. That's absolutely absurd. And if you don't think that speakers are paid, they are often. Sometimes they're free, but most of the time, big platform speakers are taking speaking fees. And that doesn't mean that they don't believe what they're saying. Now, if someone's paying me $500,000 for a soundbite, like that's more plausible, right? So in the documentary, I will say that's not uncommon, right? To get paid speaking fees. And also she wrote books. She started a nonprofit and accepted donations. I think the term they use is like benevolent gifts, but like donations. And like she was doing a lot of pro-life work. They show tax documents on the screen in the documentary and show them adding up to something close to $500,000. But it's very quick. And I was like not blinking either. Like I'm trying to pay attention. And my impression was that segment was unclear. And I don't like putting tax documents up and being unclear about what you're showing. If you're showing receipts, show receipts and explain them. And for me, I couldn't tell, okay, wait, is this from 1 year? Is this from a decade of like different years, like adding up amounts? Is this for just her nonprofit? Is this all her avenue streams? And are other people being paid by her nonprofit? Like, does she have an administrative assistant that's getting a salary out of this? Like, all of that's a little bit unclear. Josh, I know you looked into some of the 990s to try to get more information. Can you try to like explain your best guess of what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. So if you go into GuideStar and you look up Roe No More, you can find her nonprofit. They have 3 990s. These are the, every nonprofit every year is required to send a major financial document. It's sort of kind of like an audit and a report of what you brought in, what you spent, how you spent it. And you give that to the IRS, and the IRS immediately gives that to GuideStar, and so you can kind of just look up all of those things. And like I had seen one article that said that they thought she was getting $500,000 a year. I definitely don't think that's the case, unless there are like other corporations that I don't see the documents for, and you add up all these other things. And again, it's super unclear. If that nonprofit was the only nonprofit was like where all the money was getting funneled in, she was not making a lot of money. She was getting like 25 grand to maybe 40 grand salary a year, at least paid by the payroll. Maybe she was, again, some other way being paid, a book fee or speaking fees. Maybe we're going somewhere else. I don't know, but there wasn't a lot of ERI brings in more money than Norma McCorvey's organization, at least her nonprofit was, and none of us are really well paid, And so I didn't come away with it. Basically, I don't know. I don't yet know enough information to really conclusively know what was going on. But my best guess is that she wasn't making a crazy amount of money doing pro-life work. She might have actually been making less than almost all of us are, and we don't make that much.
But to be fair, like what was she doing before? We know she was working class. She cleaned apartments and housing and things like that for her job. And it is incredibly possible that she was being paid better in the pro-life movement than before. And we don't really know all the details of that.
Yeah.
But my honest take is, if your evidence for what she's saying is the money, first off, that cuts both ways. Pro-choice and pro-life. I mean, there's some confusion over like whether or not she made money for this documentary. So my understanding is that she did make money off of cooperating with the documentary people, but from licensing her photos and things like that, not like actually her statements, which I think is a distinction without a difference. She did,
at least in her mind.
In her mind. I mean, she had financial gain from being in this documentary. That doesn't mean that her statements are untrue or insincere. And she did make money from speaking and doing pro-life things. And there were also pro-life things maybe she did that she didn't make any money off of, like prayer vigils and things like that. We don't know if she was like a salaried employee or if she was speaking fees only. But that doesn't mean, even if she made a fair amount of money every year she did pro-life work, way more than she ever would have made if she was doing other jobs. That doesn't mean she was insincere. That alone isn't enough. And if you think that's enough, it's not. Like there are lots of other reasons for that. And
I just want to highlight something you said. This is really important, and you just said it really fast. And I just want people need to understand this. For the people who want to say, okay, so she did get some money from the documentarians, so we shouldn't believe anything she says. If that's your position, if that's where you're going to kind of dig your heels in, then you kind of also have to throw out all the things that she said while being paid to do pro-life stuff. And I think neither needs to be true. I think people can get paid to speak and be sincere. And so I'm willing to accept both. But it's kind of an all or nothing thing here. If you're going to throw one out, then I think you got to kind of throw the other one out, because in both cases, there was some financial compensation thing happening.
And a lot of the articles also are kind of saying sketchy things like, oh, people were just like throwing money at her, just writing checks to her so that she would go and do pro-life stuff. Yeah. And I'm like, a lot of people fundraise their salaries so that they can do activism work. Yeah. On all sides of the political spectrum. I have fundraised my own salary so I can go do pro-life work. And I was pro-life before that. So it's weird to me that is like incriminating.
You wouldn't be able to do any of the things that you do, or almost all the things that you do, unless you did it full time. Full time. Like, that's really important. So like Norma McCorvey was doing some pro-life things that were unpaid. She was going to prayer vigils. She was she was doing things sometimes that wasn't like just like a paid 1 hour speech or whatever. And so like, she was doing pro-life things with her life. We're doing pro-life things with our life that look all like, and not all paid speaking fees either. Sometimes they're making videos or trying to help people in different ways. Like, that was part of their mission at the organization. So it looks bad on paper, but I don't think that part is terribly incriminating.
So I want to move on to the second motivation, which my honest take is probably more significant than the financial stuff. Way more. Which is the relational side. Anyone who knows her life or watches the documentary, you will understand she had a tough life. She went through some tough stuff.
Oh, it's awful.
And anyone in her situation, of course, and any human being wants to be loved, accepted. I think that it's very understandable that when people are pouring love on you, you're going to want to be in their group. Yeah. And I think that happened from both pro-choice and pro-life people. Mm-hmm. When she had her very public conversion in 95, she spoke about how she felt used during the case, and by the pro-choice lobby, being brought around and kind of paraded as like, when she had come out, at first she was anonymous and then she came out as herself. And it was like, this is Roe. She's talked that way.
But also, like, I think really importantly, and this is, and a lot of this is from this Nightline interview that he did in 95. So I'll try to link to that or something. Like, find the Nightline interview that he did, and it's like it's Ted Koppel, I think. It's like 20 minutes long, and she also expresses real frustration with the pro-choice people who wouldn't listen to her ideas. He wanted her ideas, and she wanted to be kind of taken more seriously. And she felt like sometimes both sides would parade her around and kind of as like this, symbol, but not like be letting her do, saying whatever she wanted to say or paying attention to her ideas. And that really bothered her when that happened.
Absolutely. And she has expressed, Father Frank Pavone has posted some of her text messages on Twitter between him and her about how she identified the pro-life movement as her family and felt very connected to the people. And I think some of the people that welcomed her into her Christian faith really wrapped their arms around her and became her family and loved on her.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good thing, but I think that also is very plausible motivation to lean in and say some things that maybe she didn't believe. I'm just saying, like, that's part of what we need to kind of wrestle with here.
Yeah.
Did that happen? And for me personally, watching the documentary, and I didn't really watch a lot of stuff before the story broke about her. I'd been watching it in the past couple days. She really reminds me of certain people in my life who have a similar thing in common, like something in common with her, where when they, and these other people in my life have been through some of the similar abuse that she was going through in her early life. People who have been severely abused will often do this thing. And this isn't necessarily a criticism. It's just an observation. I think it's really a coping mechanism for when you've been through abuse like that.
Yeah, it's a human nature thing.
It's a what?
It's a human nature thing.
Human nature thing. Yes, absolutely. I think so. Where when you're in a room of people, you might have what you believe in your heart, but you're more likely to, everyone's expressing something really strongly and you want to be loved by them and you want to be accepted by them. And so what's the easiest thing to do? Well, if you don't know other coping mechanisms for stuff like this, you are going to nod and say, oh yeah, And when you're in a room the next day with people who completely disagree or, are of a different sentiment, you have what you believe in your heart and you're around them and you're saying,
Right.
Because that's just a coping mechanism for someone who, if they've felt rejected, if they're terrified of not being accepted, if they're really needing human connection and love, they're going to be inclined to do that. Is it healthy? No. Is it understandable? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I've seen this in other people, and this is speculation. I didn't know her, but this is my impression of her. And I think that is a very plausible thing. We're going to go through what our most plausible explanation of what she said is, and then alternative ones. But that's, I think, something that probably was going on for her.
Yeah. And that might be why this is so, I think, painful for the pro-life leaders who were her friends and family. Again, like, this is kind of before my time. So I didn't personally know Norma McCorvey. I was never on the same stage with her. This was happening, before I got involved in the pro-life movement. I know, either of a lot of those people that she was connected with, or in one case, I know one personally, or a few of them personally. And I hear one of the things that they're saying a lot is, but she said all these pro-life things this whole time. And so, like, there's no way that she could have been pro-choice in any way. And I was like, but maybe she was leaning in to the things that she knew you wanted her to say because you were actually being so loving to her. Like, I think that, like, there's a sense where this is something really great about the pro-life movement. We were so accepting of this woman who was seen as, like, Cruella de Vil, she was like the worst. And she came in and she was treated the same way Abby Johnson has been. She's been welcomed with open arms. She might have been given a platform a little too fast. Even Father Pavone has said that can happen sometimes in a recent CNA interview. But we were really loving to her. We, the royal we, the pro-life movement. And I love that. But it doesn't mean that she was always being completely transparent with everyone that was around her. And that's really hard. It makes everything complicated.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to, I just want to kind of give, I think Josh and I are on the same page. What's my honest appraisal? Like, I'm just like speculating here, given different interviews I've seen from her from the 90s, different things she said publicly, what she said in this documentary, and what her friends have said about her. My honest thing, is she pro-life? Is she pro-choice? The thing that's wrong here is the question. The labels are not helping here.
Yes.
Because I think pro-choice people who are watching those statements are like, oh, she's pro-choice the whole time. We've been betrayed. And the stakes were high and this hurts. And she said a bunch of pro-life things publicly, and she really was pro-choice the whole time. And the pro-life people are looking at it going, no, we know she was really pro-life. Yes, she had those sentiments, but like she also believed pro-life things, right? Okay, so the labels.
She said these things. She wrote this book. She wrote this poem. She went to these prayer vigils, etc. She must have been pro-life. And so talk a little bit about the labels.
So I think that it really depends on how you define things. Now, the traditional passionate pro-lifer, if they hear someone say, I believe abortion should be safe and legal in the first trimester of pregnancy, and I think that those abortions are upsetting, but we really need them, or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. Is that person pro-life or pro-choice? Well,
most pro-lifers are going to say pro-choice.
They're going to say pro-choice. I think that my grandma's generation, like my grandmother, I have heard her throughout the years. I love her so much. I love her dearly. And throughout the years, even Roe from Roe v. Wade was pro-life. And so that's her sentiment. But if she heard Norma McCorvey say these things,
right,
I think she'd be like, she's not pro-life. Oh my goodness, it's been a lie.
Like, you're missing a part of the puzzle. The 95 Nightline interview, like, Ted really pushes her on this because clearly she had said to him on the phone that day, I think first trimester abortion should be legal. And he's like, what? So like he keeps on asking her about it, and she makes it pretty clear that she thought first trimester abortions ought to be legal. She was opposed to them in the second and third trimester, except for the cases where the baby is really, really disabled, like anencefalo. She basically describes anencephaly, and says she actually says those babies should be aborted. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for someone that you use the label pro-life with to say. That's what on our team, when we hear someone say that on a campus, we put them in the pro-choice category. But they're on a spectrum. Like, there's people that are a lot more pro-choice than that person, but like most pro-choice people at least think that first trimester abortions ought to be legal. That's most of the abortions.
And my best guess is that she did move a little bit on this spectrum. I think that at the time of the case, Roe, I think she was more pro-choice.
Yes.
And I think as she learned more, as she spent more time around pro-life people, as she saw what abortion looked like, I mean, there's lots of reasons why she would move. I think she did move to the spot she was in the 95 interview, which she's very clear in the 95 interview where she stands. And it's how most pro-life people would think about pro-choice.
Right.
So then she probably moved even more than that. Maybe she moved a little bit more than that, maybe not, and then moved back. We don't really know. Do I think that she, during her pro-life years, or when she's publicly doing all these pro-life things, does she want Roe to be overturned? I think probably. And so some of her pro-life friends have expressed how much in private Norma McCorvey grieved the babies who were killed because of Roe, grieved the Roe decision, and it really held that on her shoulders in a personal way, which I don't think any of us can hardly come to understand psychologically how that feels.
Yes.
Must have been some sincere remorse. And we see that in a lot of her speeches.
Yeah. This was a really helpful thing, I think, that Abby Johnson actually said, just to kind of jump in on that, because Abby's talked about how she's had this number of 22,000, that she kind of feels this weight on her shoulder that she felt responsible for when she was working at Planned Parenthood. And she said, whereas Norma McCorvey felt the weight of all of the abortions. Yeah. Basically no other convert outside of maybe Dr. Bernard Nathanson, because he helped make abortion legal, maybe someone like that. But very few people felt that kind of weight. And we do believe that was sincere, that she did feel that weight.
So I sincerely think she wanted to overturn Roe. She wanted abortion to be significantly more restricted than it is today. And so if you hear that, She's pro-life, right? Okay, wait, there's more. I think that she actually.
But wait, there's more.
Right. I think at the same time, it's entirely possible that during these pro-life years, she still sincerely believes first trimester abortions should be legal, or maybe even are okay. The line's a little blurry. She's not really clear. Yeah. But I'm just saying that I think that is actually very possible.
Yes.
And so are the pro-life people who knew her, who are saying she was pro-life, are they lying? I don't think so. I think that they're defining pro-life differently than I would.
Right.
And I also think it's, given what my impression of her as a person and her coping mechanisms are, she was also in the rooms nodding along with the phrases baby killing. She's going, mm-hmm.
Right.
The phrases, all these things we need to overturn Roe. Mm-hmm. And they're like, she's pro-life.
Right.
And I don't think she's lying. Now in the documentary, she's like, I was an actress.
Right.
And the person asks her, was it all an act? And she's like, yeah, it was. I played them and they played me. Like, she's very saying these things. But I think that was it all an act is such a bad question. It's so ambiguous, especially if you're going to take just a part of the answer, which of course it can't include the whole answer. She probably talked for a while.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're cherry picking. I don't know. But I'm saying, was it all an act could mean her Christian conversion, right, her Catholic conversion, her statements about Roe overturning Roe, her friendships with pro-life leaders. It could mean speaking more pro-life things on stage than you actually believed. It could mean those things and more. And when she's like, yeah, it's like, oh no.
It's hard. What does that mean? It's right. Really hard to know. Like it's basically impossible for us today to say we know all of the truth of what's going on. We're doing our best with we're giving a very educated guess based on a lot of evidence and a lot of different things that we're pulling through here. But this is part of why this conversation is so complicated, is you're dealing with a lot of different quotations and just trying to be like, what is the most plausible through line here of what was going on for this super complicated woman and hurting woman. Like a lot of the pro-life people, one of the things that's really hard for me to know, and I honestly don't know. I haven't asked. I haven't, reached out to the people who knew her and grilled them on this. But it's something that's not clear to me is what did they know about her actual views? Because watching it last night, I think my take was that maybe they just really had no idea. Maybe they never asked.
Yeah.
Maybe whether it's an intentional don't ask, don't tell thing, or just they didn't feel the need to, because that's her views about abortion weren't as important as the fact that she was Jane Roe and she had this kind of conversion thing happen or whatever. But then one of Father Frank's tweets this morning kind of said that he wasn't surprised by anything that she said last night, and that she had said those things to him lots of times before. So I don't know how many pro-life leaders knew what her views were and how many didn't. I don't even know what Father Frank's tweet means exactly.
Right.
I just this is what's one of those parts of this whole story that is nebulous right now.
Because she says things like, well, that's why they call it a choice. And he
right.
says,
what does that mean?
He says in his tweets, yeah, she would say that a lot. And she believed that choice to kill the baby was wrong. But then she's saying very crass things about how she's very flippant about abortion and she couldn't care less.
Right.
So it's kind of weird and hard to understand what exactly did she think. It really is. And this is speculation. But at the bottom line, I think that, did she probably want to overturn Roe? Yes. Was she lying the whole time? No, I think it's an alternative explanation. Maybe we should talk about that. Is there anything else you want to say about what you actually think was going on for her?
I mean, I'll just reiterate. I think she really wanted to be loved and accepted. I think that is a critical part of her story and what is going on for her that just has to be recognized. I think just the one thing I'd say before we go into alternative explanations is just responding to another kind of pro-life counter argument about this plausible explanation, is people pointing out that she did unpaid prayer vigils and things like that. And I really don't think that proves anything, because neither of us think that Norma was primarily in this for the money. In fact, Jason Jones said something like kind of humorous about that last night. Who's a pro-life leader, and he said, "Look, if she was in it for the money, she got a bad deal. Like, she was arguably making more money from the pro-choice side. I'm with him there. I think she wanted adulation, and if that's true, you need to understand something I can kind of explain as another pro-life speaker, who is not nearly as popular as Norma McCorvey was, but not popular at a pro-life event. She wanted adulation, and you better believe that she got adulation at every single pro-life event she was at, whether she was getting paid to or not. I have gone and done prayer vigils before as a speaker, where it's like, you're going to do this talk, that's kind of the main event, but we're going to have you do these 2 or 3 or 4 other things at the same time. And over a couple of days, and I'm doing events with pastors, I'm doing events with the staff, and I'm going to a 40 Days for Life prayer vigil just to pray with some pro-lifers for an hour. And everyone gets super excited when I show up, and it's like, oh, Josh Brom is here. Now this is like an extra special hour of prayer. It's like the way that it feels, even though it's really not. But they like, that's just natural thing that happens when the outside speaker person comes in. And again, she got that way more than me. I'm not comparing myself. She was way more of a celebrity than I am, and maybe ever will be. And that's totally okay. But I do want to say, it does feel nice to walk into a room or onto a prayer vigil and have everyone know you and just be glad that you're there and thanking you for your work. I don't think that I appreciate that or desire those feelings maybe as much as someone like Norma McCorvey does. It frankly doesn't do that much for me, and maybe that's a good thing for my health. But I'm not seeking that. But it definitely happens, and it doesn't feel bad. And I think that happened every time she was at a prayer vigil. So the fact that she sometimes hung out with pro-life people doing unpaid things, again, if one of her primary motivations was getting love and acceptance for the first damn time in her life, and she was getting it from truly loving pro-life people, then the fact that she wasn't getting paid on that day to do a thing, unfortunately, doesn't prove anything.
It's not a criticism of her character, but it really is an explanation, because she herself says, I always wanted to be loved. I like attention. I wanted to be a movie star. And I'm not saying like she was a movie star, but if you are a person that doesn't have family and don't have a healthy relationship with people close to you that are saying that you're worth something, you are worthy, and you are loved, and then you have thousands of people everywhere you turn, we love you, Norma, we accept you, applauding you, it's irresistible.
You'd have to be a saint to not care about that. You'd have to be a saint to not care about that after being so brutally betrayed in her childhood, in her teenage years, and later on, even from her mind from the pro-choice movement. To go through all of that abuse and then not want to be able to walk into a room and have people love her. Like, of course she did. And again, like, we really want to be clear. This is not a Norma bashing thing. I'm just saying, like, of course, it just explains a lot. And I'm just really sad for her. Yeah. And my all my hope would have been is that, like, she just becomes as healthy and flourishes as much as possible. And I think she probably could have gone further along that. And she passed too soon. It's really sad.
It also makes sense that she wouldn't say from the microphone, I do actually support first trimester abortion,
right.
But that she might say that to her closest friends that she has developed relationships with and knows won't walk away and will love her unconditionally.
Yeah.
And if that's true, it makes sense that a couple pro-life leaders that were around her, that were her genuine friends and didn't just know her from her speaking, that she would be honest with them. And they're saying, yeah, we're not surprised by what she said in this documentary. That's just Norma. That's how she talked. That's how she felt. And we know her genuine pain behind the scenes. Yeah. And we can tell you she was genuinely pro-life, meaning she wanted to overturn Roe. She wanted to change abortion things. She wanted abortion reform. And yeah, she struggled with this, and this. You know, like that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Let's look at alternative explanations because I don't want to take too much time.
Yeah. because there's a lot of different possible ways to interpret this. This is why a lot of people disagree right now, and a lot of people are going to disagree with what we think is the most plausible explanation, and that's fair because it's super complicated. But just so you know that we're at least thinking about the other explanations, let's talk about a few of them, starting with the most common pro-choice one, like the ones that's in the headlines and all the pro-choice stories. I think they're way oversimplifying things. They're basically saying Norma was faking all of her pro-life views and even her religious conversion the entire thing, the entire time. She got paid and she took the money and she pretended to be Christian. She pretended to be pro-life. She spoke the speeches that were written for her, and it was all an act, which is part of why you see in the documentary, the pro-choice activist feels so betrayed. When what she feels like she's seen, as this clip is being played for her on a laptop, she feels like she's seen someone say, I'm totally pro-choice this whole time. But we think that's an overreach, that pro-choice people are like, that this is not the most plausible explanation. Why don't you talk a little bit about why?
So, well, let's say, why is it plausible? Well, she uses phrases like, this is my deathbed confession. She uses phrases like, I was a great actress, that sort of thing. Yeah. And when, they talk about, where you used, where you manipulated, she's like, I manipulated them and they used me. Like it was a two-way street.
Right.
So those are the things that like are in favor of this. What I don't believe it to be the truth, I think that Father Frank Pavone's tweet really does a lot, but what does he mean by the tweet? I'm not sure, but it seems like he's saying, and from his different interviews, he's like, I knew her personally. I knew what she was like. I knew how she talked, and I'm not shocked to hear any of this.
Right.
He's not coming out and saying, I'm shocked. This whole time she was telling me she was 100% pro-life, and now she's saying these things. They must have, strong-armed her into saying these things. Yeah. Or maybe she's doing it for the attention. Like, he's not saying any of those things. He's saying, yeah, we're not shocked. This is Norma.
Right.
And to me, if she was the actress and she had him fooled the whole time or something, that feels weird. It doesn't work.
Yeah. I don't think if she was faking her conversion, then she would have religious icons all over her room. Mm-hmm. I don't think she just put that up for the filmmakers or something like that. Like from what we can tell, and like the process that she went through with Father Frank too. You as the Catholic person on this conversation can explain more. Like that is no small process. That was a lot of time spent, and I just don't buy that she was a fake Christian. I think she really was religious. I think she was a religious person that like I would categorize as pro-choice, and there are pro-choice Christians who really love Jesus. And whether or not their views about abortion completely line up with the Bible or those religious views, I think not. I've got views about that, but I think it's more likely that she was truly a Christian, whether that means Protestant or Catholic, whatever. I think she truly loved Jesus, as far as we can tell. And that was a legitimate conversion that meant a lot to her. That seems more likely to me than the idea that she was 100% pro-life or even 100% pro-choice.
And was she completely authentic in a public way? I don't think so. But I think that's different than I was a lying actress that had them all fooled. That's different.
I don't think she's that good of an actress.
Right.
I don't think she could have acted all of that for 22. And I think that's part of why there's been so much pro-life skepticism too.
Yeah.
It's like, really, she acted everything over 22 years? I don't think she acted everything.
And if I was a close friend of hers, I mean, the kind of pain that I am imagining them walking through with her, you can't fake that kind of pain. You gotta be one hell of an actress. And she just doesn't strike me as that kind of person. Like there are some people who are really charismatic, Ted Bundy types. And she does not seem like a Ted Bundy type of, I'm going to get you fooled for 22 years. That's just not. Okay.
No.
Another explanation. Maybe she flip-flopped back and forth. Maybe she was pro-choice at one point, pro-life at another point, pro-choice, pro-life, going back and forth. I just feel like that's like really weird to say. Maybe, another like version of that is that she was genuinely pro-life, but then the cameras are on. She's having a really bad day. And these interviews do not display anything authentic about what she believed. She was like venting on camera. So I feel like this is just kind of hard to grasp that that's plausible, that she was like really that flip-floppy about something so fundamental.
Yeah.
It's possible, but like the idea that she's having a really bad day and giving this kind of interview, someone who's 100% pro-life would not say those things on camera.
No.
I can just tell you, like, it doesn't matter how bad of a day you are. That's just not, and I don't know if you have anything else to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, again, the fact that she said really pro-choice things on multiple different shooting days, and like I felt like there was a lot of consistency to what she was saying at this time in her life. Like I think there are other, like, we have other alternative explanations we can talk about a little bit that are even more plausible than this one. I just think one of the least plausible ones is that this was just a bad day, or that she fully flip-flopped like 3 times. I think it makes more sense to say her views were more nuanced than almost anybody knew. And those nuanced views were, could have been relatively the same in 1995 and the same in 2016 and 2017 when these interviews happened. Like, that just makes more sense, I think, on its face than she did a couple of radical 180-degree turns.
Yeah. One of the other ones we thought about is she saying spicy things, playing it up for the camera? I mean, it's like possible, but I don't really get that vibe at all. And at the same time, again, if she's pro-life, you're not going to say things like that for attention, because if you are 100% pro-life, the stakes are really high.
Yep.
And
you could be ruining this legacy that you've spent the last 20 years doing pro-life stuff for. Are you going to, if you really think that all abortions should be illegal, are you going to say on a bad day, or just because you want attention, I think most abortions ought to be legal? Like, that's a stretch.
This is my deathbed confession. Like,
that's a significant phrase.
Yes.
That's a really significant, that means something.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should completely, like, just throw everything out. Just say, like, nothing she says after deathbed confession we're going to pay any attention to, because it's different than some of the things that she said before. Like, that's not what we do with deathbed confessions.
Right. And there was another phrase that really struck me, and I remember I was like, and I don't remember the exact quote, and it was a lot of typing, but it was something along the lines of, I was putting on a show then, and I'm not now. Like, I really was playing it up then, and all bets are off. Like, all my walls are down. Something along those lines.
Right.
And I believe her. I mean, she seems very candid when she says that.
That was a thing that also, again, a lot of people don't care what the director has to say because the director is biased. But I mean, that was, according to him, his impression was that he said, and other people have said the same thing, which is like, if you compare the way she talks on this documentary with the way she talks when she's doing a speech, one thing seems super scripted and one thing doesn't. And that lends credibility to what she was saying at the end. It doesn't seem like this was kind of this, acting moment. It seems like she just put all the walls down, and that's rough. But I don't feel like we can just throw everything out that she says on this documentary, especially given that I don't see, like, deceptive editing tricks happening.
Another explanation is that she was suffering from mental illness at the time of the interviews. And I am not a licensed counselor. I'm not a mental health specialist. I have a significant amount of personal experience, and I studied psychology, but I think a common sense person can watch the documentary for themselves. You probably should watch them if you're going to say this claim.
Don't just listen to us.
Right? If you're going to claim mental illness and that she wasn't in her
people.
right mind, which is something we were looking out for. I mean, I have cared for people in their old age, when they are on morphine, when they have mental health issues. I've cared for people with schizophrenia and bipolar and all that. I'm telling you, she feels lucid. Like, my impression is she is lucid and sober in the interviews.
Right.
And did she have mental health issues? I think that's entirely possible. I've heard a lot of people talking about them, but not being all that specific. Obviously, she talked about substance abuse issues herself in her writings and publicly. She's very open about that. But
others have too.
Did she have a mental health diagnosis, or was she undiagnosed something or other? It is possible. But do I think that that's the most plausible explanation? No. Honestly, she on camera in these interviews in the documentary, she doesn't seem to be in like a hypomanic state or anything like that. That's just my impression. I might be wrong.
And for whatever it's worth, everything that she said about her views about abortion in this documentary seems to line up with what she said in 1995 on Nightline. Like, there's consistency there. A consistency that is shocking for most pro-lifers who have only heard Norma McCorvey is way pro-life and have never watched this Nightline interview where she says, yeah, first trimester abortions ought to be legal. Like, that's going to be an understandable shock for pro-life people. But like, the fact that there's consistency, that's over, over 20 years between Nightline and that interview.
And her friends are saying that this is just Norma. Like, her friends are not coming out saying, I'm really concerned that they took advantage of her, because she doesn't seem like herself at all. Like, we don't see that. You know what I mean? So I think we would hear more people saying, I'm really concerned they took advantage of her, or like, we should sue on her behalf because she was, being taken advantage of. I mean, that's really not something that I'm hearing her friends say.
So I'll push back a little bit. I feel like I do see some pro-life leaders saying that she was taken advantage of. Sure. And it's not really clear what that means. Like, what do you mean? That she, like, when you say that she was vulnerable in her last years, I don't know exactly what that means. Do you mean that she was out of her mind? Do you mean that she, had just become pro-choice really recently and then they kind of like pounced? Like, I don't know what that means, but I have seen some pro-life leaders say they think it's messed up that they made this documentary. And part of that claim, though, also is that the documentary didn't get released until after she died. Yes. And that a lot of people have talked about that. And just real quick to say something about that, the director was asked why it took 4 years to make this documentary. And he said part of that was because it was really, really complicated to figure out how to edit this thing into a story that made sense, into like, and something that was only 2 hours long. And also he said, we really wanted to track down a lot of B-roll that was really, really hard to find. Like, they had to like find some college library that had like old pictures and like documentary footage that they could use. Like you said, just took a really long time. It doesn't seem like it was the only thing that they were working on. But even if that isn't true, like, her death was an important part of the story of this documentary. They were filming her in her last days, and they filmed her funeral. Like, that's part of the documentary. So naturally it wasn't going to come out until at least some point after that. I don't think the goal was ever to have it out before, because it's like, so there's a thing that a pro-choice person said about this is they said they felt like, again, coming from, and I don't agree with this perspective, but as a pro-choice person, they were watching and saying they didn't like what they saw of the funeral, of the memorial service. They felt like it was like gross, that pro-life people were, speaking, and basically they felt like putting words in her mouth, kind of a thing on this day. And they felt like this documentary is kind of like the true memorial service for Norma McCorvey. And so different people are kind of feeling different ways about all of that.
I think that's great clarity. So we're running out of time this morning. Of course, we wanted to get this out as early as we possibly could, but I had a conflicting arrangement. So I actually need to leave, and Josh is going to finish up with our closing thoughts and I think one more alternative explanation. So I wish I could stick around.
Thanks so much for joining me. This was really helpful to have you on, and I'll tie a bow on all this.
Awesome.
Okay, one final alternative explanation that I thought was worth talking about was the idea that she was acting out of bitterness. Even Father Frank Pavone had expressed, as I said before in a CNA interview, that the pro-life movement sometimes gets converts speaking too soon. And the direct quote on that is, one would have to say that as in any movement, when there's a convert, you've got to be careful not to put them into the lights and the cameras before they've had the healing that they need. I really appreciate that Father Frank said that. I feel like I have personally witnessed that myself in the movement. I think we need to be really careful about that. And so I think a lot of the pro-life leaders around Norma McCorvey meant well, but I think part of this other alternative explanation would be that maybe some of the pro-life leaders didn't really know always what to do with her. Given her, like, sometimes reportedly she acted erratically. She had substance abuse problems. She had financial difficulties. And just to kind of give this theory as much kind of credibility as I can, as far as saying, like, here's the strongest version of this argument, I think. There's a chastity speaker named Don Goldstein who tweeted about in 2007 that she had expressed some concerns to one of the speakers bureaus, one of like a pro-life or a Christian speakers bureaus that was, helping manage Norma McCorvey's speaking. She said that she had expressed concern to them about Norma McCorvey's drinking. And specifically, she felt like sometimes in situations like these kind of small private dinners, sometimes these things happen when you go and do a speech. Like I'm going to fly in one night and I'm going to do like a VIP dinner thing with some staff or board members or big donors or something like that and show them a good time. And then the next day is like these different events. Like she was doing things like that. And this chastity speaker, again, Don Goldstein, said that she felt concerned that some of the pro-life people were maybe unknowingly, but were over serving her alcohol. And she was really concerned for Norma's kind of health and safety. And she expressed that probably maybe someone should be traveling with Norma to protect her from that. Rebecca Kiesling, another pro-life leader, has said that several speaker bureaus had dropped her, and maybe for related issues. I don't know. I know nothing about that. But you could add those things up and say there's this plausible scenario that she was feeling frustrated or betrayed by being dropped and maybe having less of a voice and then acted out. I don't know. Again, I feel like when I watched the documentary, this isn't the most plausible explanation to me, that this was just her acting out. Because again, you've got to be betraying all of your pro-life beliefs, the things that you said before, to then say first trimester abortions ought to be legal. Donald Trump shouldn't have become president. Hillary Clinton should have been the president anyway, like these different things that he said. It just doesn't totally add up to me. And notice that some of this could be true at the same time as our plausible explanation that we talked about her wanting adulation and that being a primary motivator for her. Like her being bitter wouldn't prove that everything that she's saying on the documentary is false. It might be one of her motivators, but I don't think that would necessarily, again, say like, okay, we've got to throw everything out now. And so a couple of final thoughts. One, I think it is worth noting that Flip Benham got way better results when he transitioned from yelling at Norma McCorvey when she was working at the abortion clinic to actually sitting down with her and talking with her. And again, this is why we talk about relational apologetics a lot. Why we talk about it a lot. That you're going to have a greater impact on people that you sit with, that you listen with, that you express some cares for, and even beyond that, if you're friends with them, you're going to have a greater impact on them. Like that had a way better impact on Norma McCorvey than anyone yelling baby killer at her as she was walking in. And there is footage of people yelling baby killer at her, and I would never condone anything like that. That is not helpful. Regardless of whether Norma McCorvey was truly exploited or not, I just want to say for the record, I believe it would be wrong to exploit someone for our cause. People are not trophies. And we as a movement should probably be even more cautious with converts in the future. Again, I'm not saying that she was necessarily exploited. I am lacking too much information to make that accusation. I'm just saying, regardless of what actually happened with Norma, we can all agree that it would be wrong to exploit people, and we shouldn't do that. The pro-life movement believes that human beings are intrinsically valuable because of the kind of thing they are. They don't just have instrumental value, meaning they don't just have value to a cause or because of something that they can do. They are valuable in and of themselves, which means that we should treat them that way. And I do think that at least some of the pro-life leaders were treating her like she was a really valuable person, and all the time that they spent with her and all the care that they showed for her. And I'm really glad for that. But just for the record, we all agree we shouldn't exploit people, and we need to be really careful with how we treat converts and how quickly we give them a platform. And have they gone through healing yet? Like, and all of those different things. Just agreeing with what Father Frank said in CNA. And finally, I just want to remind you that Norma McCorvey's personal beliefs are not actually relevant to whether abortion is actually right or wrong, or whether or not someone ought to be pro-life. And so just to kind of close this out, I just want to just briefly touch on what we said a couple of days ago on Facebook, is pro-choice people are going to ask you about this. And I think you should be ready with some things to say. And so we walked through two kind of quick scenarios. So one of the things that we talked about is, what do you say if you've name dropped Norma McCorvey in the past and pro-choice people ask you about it? Or pro-choice people just bring her up, like, hey, Norma McCorvey wasn't really pro-life, that kind of thing. I think that you can say something like, I'm so glad you asked about that. Like if you've referenced Norma McCorvey before, you just say, like, I think that me referencing her story to you might have implied before that, like, my pro-life beliefs are more impacted by her story than they actually are. I am not pro-life because of what McCorvey believed about abortion, regardless of her actual position. I am pro-life for philosophical reasons and scientific facts, which I would be happy to talk through more with you. I referenced McCorvey's story before because I got excited, and I get excited anytime someone from the other side changes their mind and dedicates their life to an important cause. It says something about how your past doesn't define your future, and I was really pleased with how the pro-life movement welcomed her despite her past. So I think all of that is still relevant and the kind of thing that would be helpful to say to people when this comes up in the future. I want to recommend that if you're going to have a strong position about this, that if you're going to be making statements about the truth of what was going on for her, I think you ought to watch the documentary because that is her speaking. And I think it's also appropriate to listen to what other people have to say, other people who knew her family members, other pro-life leaders who knew her. I think we should take in all of that evidence, as well as what Norma McCorvey said for herself on what she felt was her deathbed confession. And then we do our best to shift through that and try to figure out what makes the most sense. But I don't think that you should only listen to one side. I think that just like I talked about in the recent podcast with Isaac Saul from Tangle, we ought to be listening to both sides before we come to a strong conclusion. So yet again, it's the same message. Listen to all sides and then do your best as an open-minded person who's avoiding confirmation bias to come to believe more true things and fewer false things than you did yesterday. Thanks so much for listening.